eBay, Amazon, Dig, /.accounts, all of a sudden the cost is not all that high. Or if it is high, you're amortizing it across the whole internet, right? All of a sudden, okay, that makes sense, right? So you're not getting security, the same security benefits on dig.com and /.com as you are on Expedia and PayPal, which is not bad, right? It's good. So yeah, once you forget about privacy, right, there's some good things. So yeah, you got only one front door to secure. That's my car, and lessons learned, right? So we talked about a few attacks, and we talked about one benefit. So let me just quickly recap what we talked about. The first thing we talked about is that complexity breeds insecurity, right? The current situation is simply not sustainable, right? I don't know how many accounts I have. I play with WebTO a lot, so I sign up to a few sites per day, and I have hundreds, and it got to a point where I cannot remember my Expedia account, right? Expedia, I use something quite a bit because I travel a lot, but it got to the point where I have so many usernames and so many passwords, I can't even remember the username to the important sites, right? Like Expedia. And this is a real thing. I cannot remember, so I just keep trying different combinations. I keep trying, I keep logging myself out. Or locking myself out because I can't remember. So in the end, I have to change my username. I have to tell them to email me the new password, right? Because you know how you can log into a site and you stay logged in for, I don't know, for a month or two, right? The worst thing that happened to me is I log in on a site and then I don't know, cookie gets deleted or something, I get logged out. That's like the worst thing because I have no idea what my username and password is. So I just panic. And, that's bad, right? And I'm paranoid, I'm a security expert or whatever, but even I have to end up using stupid schemes like our secure SSO of having one login and two passwords. One's insecure, one's secure, right? The worst thing that happens when, you go into dig.com and say, well, you need to use at least one letter in your password. So then you have when your insecure password, one secure password, and one insecure password with the letter 2 in it. I'm sure you guys can come across this because I cannot be the only person who's feeling this pain. And the thing is, it's not going to get any better, right? The internet is not going anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. So the number of sites that we use on a daily basis is only going to increase, and the complexity is certainly not going away. Okay, so it's only going to get worse before it gets better. Okay, so next thing is we talked about flexibility and security, right? Okay, so OpenID, on one hand, solves a nice problem, right? It solves a real problem, and it solves the complexity by introducing this nice, easy-to-use OpenID mechanism. However, with OpenID, then, there's a whole raft of problems that are specific to OpenID, and flexibility being one of them. When OpenID designed, right, it wasn't, the Brad Fitzpatrick didn't sit down there and say, hey, in a few years it's going to be used to secure Amazon.com and Bank.com. No. When it was designed, it was basically said, hey, I'm sick and tired of picking this new username and passwords for every single blog. So let me just throw something together, right? Here we are 3 years later, we're talking about securing Bank.com using this scheme, right? Something that is supposed to protect your comments on blogs, all of a sudden used for everything. So, when OpenID was designed, it was designed to be very flexible, right? Because it used to be a bunch of bloggers, right? Who cares about security? However, now that we actually do care about the security, things like flexibility are killing us, right? So the complexity is killing security, but flexibility is killing security just as much, right? Because who says NSA.gov port 20 or 21 is not my OpenID, right? No one can says it. So the next thing we talked about was the homebrewed cryptography. Right, and that's, if you've done anything with cryptography, you know about this, right? This is getting drummed into your head, should be getting drummed. If it's not getting drummed in your head, is that you should not be rolling your own. Ever, ever, ever. Right? Because there's always going to be smarter than you. Always. Who's going to be able to break your cryptography. Cryptography is so hard, you shouldn't even try. Okay? OpenID has tried, has learned their lesson, and now they have a hack in place where it says, run Diffie-Hellman over SSO. What's the point, right? Then we talked about phishing, right? Phishing is a very serious threat today. If you're using OpenID today, the one thing you should be keeping in mind is the next time you log in, do check the URL. I hope you know where that is. It's that address bar on the top. Do check it because there is no solution today in place to prevent phishing. Very serious threat. And, we showed you 3 separate examples of how you can get phished. You can get phished because Jai.com is malicious. You can get phished because .name host is malicious. You can get phished because myopenid.com is malicious, right? Because all the stack, everything is targeted, everything is kind of, the user is always losing because no matter who gets compromised, the user gets owned. And there's so many different components, so many different moving parts, it's actually very feasible to carry out these attacks, right? This is not theoretical. This can be very, very practical and very easy to execute. The other thing we talked about is OpenID and privacy. Right. OpenID is great because it keeps you logged in everywhere, right? It's great. You go to jai.com, you go to cutekittens.com, you go to bank.com. It's so easy. It works perfectly. However, if you care about privacy, then you should realize that all of those logins are actually being tracked. And they're not tracked on purpose, right? I mean, well, they might be tracked on purpose, but still, in fact, you're putting this, you're trusting myopenid.com with your data. Because if myopenid.com is compromised, like I said, you simply sit there and you can monitor everyone's sessions, right? So if you have myopenid.com and I own it, I just sit there, I tail the log and I see you going to this site, 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 right? And, this is done transparently. I don't even have to own you anymore. I don't have to hack your computer to find out where you're going. Because all I have to do is hack one central place, one central server, and all of a sudden, I'm just sitting there watching everyone's activity on the net. A little bit scary. We talked about the replay attacks. On the way back when you go from myopenid.com back to jai.com, if I can steal your URL and replay it, I can log in as you. Not a good thing. So we throw in some nonsense because I've hopefully demonstrated they're not providing strong enough of a security guarantee to say that I cannot spoof you. So OpenID robs you of control, right? The problem with OpenID, and to be honest with you, probably why you will never ever be able to log into Expedia.com or Bank.com with OpenID is simply because with OpenID you're outsourcing your security policy, right? I don't know of a single bank that says, oh yeah, we'll just allow some random third party we don't even know to allow users to authenticate users on our behalf, right? This is simply not feasible. It is never going to happen. However, if it does happen, there are very good things they'll be driven by that. And, as we talked about, there's only one front door to secure, right? So you can apply two-factor auth, smart cards, client-side SSO certificates, and whatever else you want to do to secure the communication. So, what are we saying? Are we saying the OpenID is doomed? Well, so it might sound like that's what we're saying. I guess that's not what we're trying to do, right? We do think the OpenID is a very great system. It solves a very real problem. I'm feeling the pain every day, and I cannot wait until more sites are using it. However, I think we've pointed out enough security and privacy concerns to be at least mildly concerned about what will happen if everyone starts using OpenID. So, with that, we encourage you to visit OpenID.net. OpenID.net is the main web page for the OpenID project. So OpenID.net contains all the specifications and all the other information that you might need if you're interested in it. The other thing is you can check out freeyourid.com. Freeyourid.com allows you to get a .name URL, which is OpenID integrated, which is eugene.tsyrklevich.name. So you go to freeyourid, you put in your name, and it gives you a URL. So in my case, it's eugene.tsyrklevich.name. So that URL you can then redirect to anywhere you want, but it also becomes your OpenID, right? And I hope you never forget your name. So in fact, you'll never be in a situation where you go to Expedia.com and you cannot remember what happened, right? Unless you just came out of coma. So with .name, right, it's an interesting proposition because you get your name, which is OpenID integrated. You put that together and you have a very interesting system. So with that, we'll take any questions. Yep.
Looking at a website that has a couple tens of thousands of users, and there's been talk coming up to me about having us support OpenID, not letting people log into us with that, but instead people want to be able to claim that they own particular pages because it's got some social networking on it. So we're contemplating either doing it as a provider or simply allowing users to embed delegation information straight onto their page, which would be a very tight control of HTML. I was wondering what the trade-offs are, what particular risks
When you act as a provider?
Well, I'm leaning more and more away from not acting as a provider. Because most of these users will have live journal accounts or AOL and then databases.
Right. So the question was, we're running a site and we have, thousands of users and we're getting approached with requests to support OpenID. I think if you're saying you're not going to be providing the actual OpenID, I think the biggest threat is what I showed when you log into jai.com and you use then jai.com as your launchpad for attacks, right? So if your site is, site.com and you allow arbitrary URLs, the problem is today you're going to use one of the existing libraries to support that. Those existing libraries, such as Jan Rain, are, they don't protect against all the attacks that we described, right? So if you were to enable OpenID today, tomorrow I go home and I use your site to port scan NSA.gov.
No, not as a consumer.
I think
let's say I have mysite.com and Bob wants to say, I own the page. I have an account at mysite.com. So on some third-party site, who he wants to prove that to, he enters mysite.com/Bob.
Okay.
To prove to that site that he owns an account with us. That's the use case we're looking at.
Yeah, I guess that's a case where you're hosting a page, right?
Yes,
I mean, in that case, there isn't really there isn't a direct threat. There's I can't attack your site directly. The threat is you can potentially, if you become as big as Facebook, right, you'll become a very big target. Because if I can own you, I can not immediately, but I can then go on to own of your users. So there's a slight, you're slightly increasing your chance of being an attacker. But then if you become the size of a Facebook, you're becoming attractive for all the other reasons anyway. So it's not a massive concern, I would say. So if you want to be providing those URLs to your users, you should be okay because it's the other parties that are involved that are actually be carrying a lot of the risk. So that's actually quite a low-risk activity.
Cool. They'll be happy to see that.
Yeah, but if you give me a few days, I might come up with something interesting. So, yeah.
Is there PII, personally identifying information stored at the provider that gets transmitted back and forth to the line party?
So the question was, is there any personally identifiable information that's stored on the host? And there doesn't have to be. So you can go into myopenid.com today and register an arbitrary URL that has no real data. It's just a URL, right? It's just a URL that says I am johnny.myopenid.com. That's the only information about it. However, if you want to make this a little bit more useful, of course, and make your life easier, you can associate other information with that URL. So you can say, here's my full name, here's my address, here's my phone number. And the next time you go onto a site and say, I'm going to register, you can say, actually, I want to give all this information to that site as a registration. I don't want to re-enter it, right? So it's quite convenient in that case. But it is of concern if you have a lot of information associated with the account. But I believe that before that information is given to the provider, you're always asked. Okay, the OpenID provider will ask you, are you sure you want to disclose your address and your email to this party? So you won't just give it away. So that OpenID verification page that you had will tell you, you're about to disclose this, this, and this to this host. Do you want to allow it?